let me show you one of my favorite little baking surprises, filling a Bundt cake with buttercream. From the outside, it looks like a simple, innocent Bundt cake, but then someone cuts into it. And surprise, frosting hiding inside. That moment never gets old for me. It looks fancy, like something from a bakery, but it's actually very doable at home. No stress, no special tools. So grab a coffee and hang out with me while I show you exactly how I do it, plus a few tips I've learned along the way. Before we get to filling the cake, let me quickly show you how I prep the buttercream. I start with store-bought buttercream straight from the can and scoop it into a glass mixing bowl. Then I use a hand mixer and beat it on medium speed for about 2 to 3 minutes. This step makes a huge difference. The frosting gets lighter, fluffier, and much easier to pipe. Once it looks soft and creamy, I add a little food coloring, starting with just a tiny amount. I always mix on low speed first, so it doesn't splash everywhere. Then increase to medium until the color is evenly blended. Personal tip from me: let the frosting sit at room temperature for a few minutes before mixing if it feels stiff. It behaves much better, and you won't have to fight it. Now, I transfer my whipped buttercream frosting into a piping bag. And this is one of those steps where a little setup saves you a lot of cleanup. Here's how I actually do it, without making a mess or losing my patience. First, I fold the top edges of the piping bag outward and slide my hand right into that fold. This gives me a really solid grip on the bag, so it doesn't slip around in my hand, and it also keeps the edges clean. That fold is key. It keeps buttercream from smearing all over the outside of the bag, which means no sticky hands and no messy edges later when you're piping. Then I scoop the buttercream into the bag using a spatula. I only fill it about halfway, and this is very intentional. Overfilling a piping bag is usually how frosting ends up on the counter, the bowl, and somehow on your sleeve, even if you're standing still. Halfway gives you much better control and makes piping easier and cleaner. Once it's filled, twist the top to seal it and gently push the frosting down toward the tip so it's ready to go. I also like to give the bag a little squeeze here to make sure there are no air pockets hiding inside. Personal tip from me: if the frosting feels a bit soft, I'll pop the filled piping bag into the fridge for just a few minutes before using it. It firms up slightly and pipes more neatly. Especially helpful if your kitchen is warm. Simple, low stress, and much more forgiving. Before we touch anything, the cake needs to be completely cooled. And yes, I know, this is the hardest part. Not warm, not slightly warm, not I think it's probably fine. Fully cooled. If the cake is even a little warm, the buttercream will melt, soak into the cake, and disappear. And while that might still taste good, it completely defeats the purpose of having a hidden filling. Here's my usual routine. Once the cake comes out of the oven, I let it rest in the Bundt pan for about 10 minutes. This helps the cake set and release more easily. Then I turn it out onto a wire rack and let it cool for about 20 minutes at room temperature. For me, a Bundt cake is properly cooled and ready to work with when the internal temperature drops to about 80 to 85 degrees Fahrenheit, 27 to 29 degrees Celsius. This extra time lets the steam escape evenly, keeps the bottom from getting soggy, and makes sure the cake is fully set before we start cutting into it. Personal tip from me: if you rush this step, you'll pay for it later. Ask me how I know. Once the cake is fully cooled, I carefully flip it upside down onto a cutting board. This always feels like a tiny leap of faith, even after doing it 100 times. I take a breath, flip confidently, and remind myself that the cake and I are on the same team. Flipping it upside down makes the filling process much easier, and keeps everything neat and even. Now I grab one of my favorite underrated tools, an apple corer. And yes, this is exactly what it sounds like. It's technically meant for apples, but it might secretly be one of the best Bundt cake tools ever. I use it to cut about 6 evenly spaced holes around the cake. I don't overthink the placement too much. I just space them out evenly so every slice gets a little surprise inside. The apple corer is perfect here because it creates clean, neat tunnels without tearing or crumbling the cake, which is especially important with a delicate Bundt. Personal tip from me, press straight down and twist gently as you go. Let the tool do the work. If you force it or rush, that's when cakes start cracking or falling apart. And nobody wants that kind of drama. If you don't have an apple corer, you can use a small knife. But I'll be honest, it's harder to keep the holes neat and even. Once you try an apple corer for this, you'll never look at it the same way again. Mine basically lives in my baking drawer now. At this point, the cake might not look very exciting, just a few little holes here and there. But trust me, this is where the magic starts. This is the moment where a normal Bundt cake quietly turns into something special. And now comes my favorite part of this whole recipe, the filling. This is where everything quietly levels up. I snip off the tip of the piping bag, not too big, just enough for a steady stream, and pipe the buttercream directly into each hole. I like to go slowly here and really feel the cake as I fill it. I pipe a little, pause, then pipe a little more, making sure the frosting travels all the way down and doesn't leave any empty pockets hiding inside. Personal tip from me. You'll actually feel a slight resistance when the hole is properly filled. If it suddenly feels too easy, that usually means there's still space inside. I also gently lift the piping tip up as I fill, so the frosting distributes evenly from bottom to top instead of just sitting near the surface. This is definitely not the time to be shy. Be generous, but controlled. You don't want frosting exploding out the top either. It's a balance. This filling is what turns a simple slice of Bundt cake into something memorable. When someone cuts into it and sees that smooth ribbon of buttercream inside, that's the exact moment you were working toward. If you accidentally overfill one hole, don't panic. Just scrape off the extra and smooth it out. Bundt cakes are forgiving, and so are we. Once all the holes are filled, I gently place the cake pieces back on top, pressing them in just enough to close everything up without squishing the cake. I like to line them up carefully so the surface looks seamless again. You want it sealed but still light, like nothing ever happened. From the outside, the cake looks completely untouched, calm, classic, and innocent. Inside, it's hiding a very good secret, and honestly, that's my favorite kind of cake. This method works because it gives you the best of both worlds. You keep the clean, classic look of a Bundt cake, but every slice has that extra surprise inside. It feels thoughtful and intentional without being complicated. You don't need special equipment, fancy fillings, or perfect piping skills. Just a little patience and a willingness to cut into your cake. And the reactions? Always worth it. There's usually a pause, a smile, and then someone immediately asking how you did it. A few things I've learned along the way. Make sure your buttercream is soft and fluffy, not stiff. It pipes more easily and fills the holes evenly. If the cake feels delicate, go slowly when coring. Let the tool do the work. This technique works with almost any frosting or filling. Buttercream, chocolate ganache, even thick pastry cream. If you're making this ahead of time, filled Bundt cakes hold up beautifully in the fridge. This is one of those techniques that looks impressive but quietly makes your life easier. Filling a Bundt cake with buttercream is one of my favorite ways to elevate a cake without turning baking into a whole production. It's simple, fun, and adds that little wow moment that makes people think you went above and beyond, even if you didn't. Once you try this, you'll never look at a plain Bundt cake the same way again. Thanks for hanging out with me. I'll see you in the next video, probably with another cake, and definitely with more coffee.